thank you for the introduction and thanks for having us. We're excited. We're going to do a little bit of a roundtable discussion on some complex GI map cases to really unravel all of those complexities, hence the title of our talk. So let's go ahead and get started. We will save a little bit of time at the end for Q&A. Hold your questions or enter them into the chat, the Q&A part of, the Q&A, not the chat, sorry. So our plan for today, we're going to talk about the GI map. You've probably heard of it. Map is a stool test, and it's an industry leader for a reason, and we all like it a lot and use it a lot and find it to be an extremely valuable clinical tool. So that's what we're going to be going through today. And we're going to do some complex case interpretation. We've got an adult case and a pediatric case for you. Lisa's going to go through the first adult case and Amy's going to go through the pediatric case so we can go through those complexities and nuances. We're going to talk about prioritizing the findings of GI map. That's probably the most common question we get on our interpretive consults, is not just what we do about it, but what order do we tackle the findings, and do we do things simultaneously? Do we take things step at a time? So we're really going to focus on that. And of course, building those clinical protocols, and then hopefully have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. So I'm gonna set the stage for us today. If you are not familiar with the GI map and you're on the Rupa platform, we are one of the foundation, or one of the primary stool tests. What sets the GI map apart is our quantitative PCR technology. So we do use qPCR for all of our microbial analysis. And that's important because we are giving you a quantitative analysis of microbes that are typically in somewhat low abundance in the microbiome. And you need a sensitive technology to find many of those low-level opportunists. Some of the other sort of technology platforms like metagenomic sequencing, they're not apples to apples comparison. And what the quantitative PCR brings to the table is, again, the sensitivity of finding these really low-level inflammatory opportunists and pathogens, and we're going to talk a lot about that. Highly sensitive test, highly accurate results, and then I will also add that the GI map also includes not only microbial analysis of pathogens, commensals, opportunists, parasites, yeast, etc., but we also include intestinal health proteins, which are critical to interpretation and analysis. So we put all those results together and we come up with a comprehensive evaluation and plan. So again, is a quantitative PCR stool test. We are measuring the genomic material of these microbes. And some other advantages to this type of testing is we really do encourage you to test where you are. There's not really any prep. There's no prep diet required for the test. It is a one sample analysis. We don't need 3 days worth of specimen that you have to keep in your fridge or anything like that. So it's a much cleaner, easier for patients. Don't need to be refrigerated. We have a really nice relationship with FedEx. You just schedule a pickup once your sample is complete. And then from a pediatric perspective, a lot of times stool is one of the easiest specimen to get from kiddos. That's a big advantage in general to stool testing. We do get questions like, okay, can this be obtained from a diaper? And the answer to that is typically yes. DNA is very stable. So that's another advantage to this type of testing. GI map stool test, if you haven't used it, I would recommend trying it on one of your complex cases, and I think you'll be impressed with the results. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Lisa and let her go through the first clinical case.
Great. Thanks, Kat. Yeah, so let's get started with our adult case for today. Next slide. There we go. So this is a 61-year-old female, and she's been dealing with multiple complex symptoms for years, decades, in fact. She's been having some gas, some belching, some silent reflux, abdominal cramps, constipation, as well as numerous brain-related symptoms. So she complained of panic attacks and vertigo, headaches, and brain fog. She's had some gallbladder issues. She's been told that she has some sludge in her gallbladder. She has low bone density and osteoarthritis. She's been having some hemorrhoids, and she's noticed she's addicted to sugar. So we're going to keep these symptoms in mind as we go through her GI map stool report and see how can we connect the dots here. So, looking at the first page of her GI map report, it looks great. These we should all see less than DL below the detectable limit. So, they're all negative, nothing of note here. Now, page 2, on the other hand, there is detectable H. pylori. Now, what I want to see with this is less than DL, below the detectable limit. This has a number, which means we found it. It's positive. Now, it hasn't quite crossed the reference range. So that's why that number is in black, not red. So you notice our reference range is a 1.0 E3. That's 1,000 cells of H. pylori per gram of stool. Now she's close. She's at 9.32 E2. That's 932 cells per gram of stool. That's just a difference of 68 cells per gram of stool. For me, that's essentially a high positive. If this H. pylori was maybe just a little bit more active, she could have been on the other side of the line. So this is where we always look to correlate with the patient's symptoms and look at what else you're seeing on the report. If there's a bunch of bacteria overgrowing, yeast overgrowing, this is probably suppressing stomach acid, so you may want to use an herbal protocol to address it. Now, looking at her symptoms, what did we have? Gas, belching, silent reflux, classic H. pylori symptoms. So right away, I'm really suspicious that this is causing her some trouble. Now, continuing on with page 2, we look at the commensal and keystone bacteria, so the good guys. Now, we're aiming for that sweet spot, not too high, not too low, so that green zone. On the whole, she's actually pretty good. Now, there is one thing of note here, and it's really underappreciated, is less than DL, below the detectable limit for Faecalibacterium prausnitzii. Never gloss over this. For me, less than DL for this microbe is actually one of the worst things I can find on a report. It's that critical. So this is one of the major anti-inflammatory microbes in the gut. It's the main butyrate producer in the gut. If this is low, you probably don't have good levels of the anti-inflammatory short-chain fatty acid butyrate. The colon cannot be healthy if there's low butyrate. Butyrate also, when we think about the brain, she's having so many brain symptoms. She has panic attacks. She has brain fog. Now, once the gut has made enough butyrate for its own needs, some of that butyrate will escape into the bloodstream, cross the blood-brain barrier, and it calms down the microglia. It stimulates BDNF. So we could see gut symptoms and brain symptoms when this goes down. So this is definitely something I'm going to be working on because this is not a good thing. So she could have inflammation in her gut, her brain, and systemically because of this. So again, a key finding here.
Yeah, I love what you're saying there, Lisa. I will agree with you that this gets not always the attention that it deserves on the GI map, and something like this is easy to miss. I often describe this as a really good clue that the environment is just not hospitable for the growth of this organism. I describe it as a very sort of high maintenance organism where if inflammation's coming to the party, it's going to show up type of things. I think the amount of research around this organism is abounding. It's been suggested as a low levels as almost a biomarker in inflammatory bowel disease. Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite organisms to talk about on the GI map and one that we pay really critical attention to.
Exactly. Yep. So, yeah. So then continuing on. So we've looked at the good guys. Now let's see what the opportunistics are doing. Now, with this, we see a couple that are severely overgrowing. So we see some numbers in red. So that's our Streptococcus and our Klebsiella. And then we also see a little bit moderate elevation for Enterococcus faecalis at the top and Staph aureus. Now, we're always looking at individual microbes, but don't forget the high-level kind of pattern recognition. You want to look at when something's overgrowing or undergrowing, what is going on in the terrain that's favoring its growth if it's overgrowing or inhibiting its growth if it's undergrowing. So when we look at this page, there's some patterns we can tease out. So things like Enterococcus, Staphylococcus, and Streptococcus tend to overgrow when there's low stomach acid. We have H. pylori, that's notorious for suppressing stomach acid. Staphylococcus and Streptococcus often come from the mouth. So you're just going to be swallowing them every day in the saliva. And if your stomach acid is low, you just don't kill them properly. Klebsiella also could come from the mouth. So again, we're seeing these oral microbiome bugs getting down into the gut in high quantities. Now, Klebsiella can give us some other clues. This one can eat undigested protein. So again, we're thinking, why might there be undigested protein? Is it low stomach acid? Is it low pancreatic enzymes? So we're going to search for those other things on the report. But again, I especially get concerned about Klebsiella, and especially when we're seeing some of these symptoms that she's having. Klebsiella is a super producer of histamine. High histamine could cause anxiety, panic attacks. We could also see things like constipation, abdominal cramps. So it could cause, again, brain symptoms, gut symptoms, a little bit of everything. And it also is gram negative. So it has LPS, lipopolysaccharide. So it's going to trigger a lot of inflammation in her body. Again, she is having some arthritis. So again, something that's a concern. So again, these are definitely things I don't want to see, that we're going to take some interventions and try to bring them back down into balance. Now, we next look at the yeast section, and sure enough, we do have some candida overgrowth as well. Not a surprise given what we've seen so far. Now, again, it's all about the terrain, the environment. What does candida like? But loves H. pylori's help in making that colonic pH and the intestinal pH a little bit more high on the high side, the alkaline side. So yeast will really thrive when the pH isn't kept where it should be kept. Again, H. pylori is probably like a primary issue here, and now we're seeing all the fallout, the consequences because of what it's doing, suppressing the stomach acid and affecting digestion. Now, brain fog, again, this is something I really think of candida with brain symptoms, brain fog, sugar addiction. I'm immediately thinking yeast. And so the test just picked it up beautifully.
Yeah, that sugar addiction piece definitely aligns with this overgrowth. Absolutely.
Now we're not done. We still have more. Parasite section, we have Dientamoeba fragilis. That was also positive. Now, this can be a nasty parasite. It lives in the colon. We're talking lower bowel here. It could be responsible for the constipation. Sometimes we see constipation, sometimes diarrhea. Abdominal cramps. I definitely see that a lot. Abdominal cramps, discomfort. So it's just going to create some inflammation in that GI tract. Now, again, connecting the dots, remember back to Faecalibacterium on page 2 that was low. Faecalibacterium, maybe it's low because you're not feeding it. It's a fiber eater. If you're not eating a lot of fiber-rich plant foods, it's just going to starve. But it also hates inflammation. That's like the canary in the coal mine when it comes to inflammation. What's hanging out in that same vicinity? This pro-inflammatory parasite. So this is what I see sometimes where Faecalibacterium is low and you get the patient's history and this makes no sense. Their diet is beautiful. They're eating fruits and veggies and whole grains and beans, legumes. Why is this thing not doing well? Maybe it's not that it's not starving. It's being fed. It's just that it's being inhibited. So we really want to target the parasite, get it out of the colon so the colonic terrain shifts, so that it will now favor the growth of Faecalibacterium. When you get the fiber in there, then you can fuel its growth, but you got to get the inflammation out. So now to the final section, the intestinal health markers. So tying it all together with the microbial markers. Now we'll notice her elastase 1 was very low. This is a marker of pancreatic enzyme output. And we want to see this above 500 for optimal pancreatic enzyme secretion. It is quite low, 166. She's not making enough pancreatic enzymes to properly digest proteins, fats, or carbs. Again, we're going to bring in some supplements to help compensate for that lack of digestive capability. Now, we also see that there's a high secretory IgA. Well, I'm actually happy about this because this is a proper immune response given what we've seen. There's 2 infections here. H. pylori and Dientamoeba fragilis. There's a high level of yeast. There's a high level of some nasty bacteria like Klebsiella. That immune system should recognize that things are not so good here. I need to be doing something. So it is doing its job. It's going up. It's upregulated, trying to deal with these things. Now, it's not being quite so successful. It needs a little help. So we're going to give it a helping hand with some herbs. And then once those pathogens have come down, the dysbiosis is balanced, that burden is just relieved from the immune system, and it'll just balance out and go down on its own. Now, final thing we see here is zonulin is elevated. Zonulin is high, which tells us there is leaky gut. Now, one of the top triggers that stimulates zonulin production is LPS. Remember back to page 3, we had a high Klebsiella level, and Klebsiella has pretty potent LPS. That could be a factor. And again, we have a parasite. So there's other things that could be causing leaky gut. So we're probably going to do some gut repair once we've removed all the things that are probably inducing leaky gut.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was
Oh, and one final slide, just of note is we do check if H. pylori is there and there are over 500 cells of H. pylori per gram of stool, we automatically run the antibiotic resistance genes. So if you're going to choose antibiotics, we just want to choose wisely and choose those are negative. In other words, ones that the H. pylori is not showing that it has genes that would make it resistant to it. Now, in this case, this H. pylori is resistant to clarithromycin. Standard triple therapy with clarithromycin would not be a good choice. However, we still have options that are negative, so we still could do antibiotics. We just have to choose a little more carefully.
all right. That was a lot.
A lot going on, yeah, complex
Yeah.
case. But it explains why she's having these symptoms. We can go back and just connect everything. It's, oh, brain fog, probably the yeast. Silent reflux, gas belching, probably H. pylori. So we hope if we address all these things, she's going to be feeling so much better. So let's sum this all up. So what were our most relevant findings for her? First thing was she has 2 infections, H. pylori and Dientamoeba fragilis. Second, she has some dysbiosis, that is an imbalance in her gut flora. So in her case, both bacterial and yeast overgrowth. Third, she has low keystone species, that less than DL Faecalibacterium prosnitzii. Fourth, she has digestive insufficiency. That we know because of her low elastase 1. Fifth, she has increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut. And we know that because of her high zonulin. Then we look at, okay, we have a lot of issues going on here. How are we going to actually boil this down to a protocol? What order are we going to use to try to address all these things? So here are how I would state her treatment priorities. 1, support digestion. I want her breaking down her proteins, fats, and carbs better. And really that's going to help with the dysbiosis too. If you don't have the enzymes to break down the proteins, fats, and carbs, it's going to eat them. The bacteria, the yeast, just going to make that Klebsiella, make that candida worse. And she's having symptoms. She's having gas and reflux and abdominal cramps and belching. Those enzymes could come in and help her symptoms too. So for me, that's the first priority. Just bring in those enzymes, support digestion. Second, I want to start promoting the growth of Faecalibacterium prosnitzii. Again, this is so important in the gut. We're going to start to implement some dietary interventions and start to encourage this and kind of nudge it up a little bit. Third, we're going to start to work on the infections. So first, address the H. pylori. Let's start in the stomach and go from there. Fourth, then we're going to address the Dientamoeba fragilis and the dysbiosis. And the dysbiosis, again, is the bacteria and the yeast. Now, because if we're going to use herbs are such great multitaskers, what herbs kill a parasite typically will help with bacteria and yeast too. So that's where these can be lumped together.
Yeah, and I know that isn't there a certain reasoning and rationale that having this kind of co-infection of H. pylori with Candida, don't they cooperate with each other, sort of make the treatment that much more cumbersome, difficult? Can you speak to that?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's what researchers say. There's an intimate relationship between H. pylori and Candida because they both help each other out so much. H. pylori suppresses the acid, and that allows a Candida to really bloom and grow. And then Candida, if it's in the stomach with the H. pylori, that's where it can return the favor. So Candida, if it's in the stomach with the H. pylori, can allow the H. pylori to actually go inside of it and hide. So if H. pylori feels threatened, such as when we're trying to kill it, if there's yeast nearby, it could go inside, hide, be protected, and then just come out later. So there is a little bit of thought that when we're seeing candida on a stool test, we don't know exactly where it came from because candida doesn't have just one little niche. Like Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, it lives in the colon. So if it's in the stool, we know it came from the colon. Candida could be anywhere from your mouth down to your colon. So the problem is if it's in the stomach, it could interfere with our clearance of H. pylori. So I like to hedge my bets personally and stick in something in the H. pylori protocol that I know has some effects against candida as well. So I'm going to actually prevent that candida from helping that H. pylori.
Awesome.
If now that we've gotten rid of the bad, the things damaging the gut, let's go in and repair the gut. So this is an example protocol of how we might accomplish all of this. So first, again, we're supporting digestion, and that's with the pancreatic enzyme supplement. So something that has those proteases, the lipase, the amylase to support protein, fat, and carb digestion. So this is going to be taken with every meal and maybe even substantial snacks. Then we want to think about the prebiotic support for Faecalibacterium prausnitzii. Now, this may be staged a little bit. So we may start with diet and then build upon that and then start to bring in some of the supplements. So I don't necessarily do this all at once because, again, we're doing some killing protocols. So, I mean, we already have a bunch of supplements there. So maybe we start with diet here and then again build from that on. Now, with the diet, we look at what does Faecalibacterium prausnitzii like to eat? It likes whole grains, beans, legumes, and lentils, and resistant starch. So let's bring in more of those. Supplementally, it really likes the prebiotic fiber partially hydrolyzed guar gum. So we might start to bring that in low and slow. I also put down tributyrin as a maybe. It's a butyrate supplement. Maybe we want to get more butyrate in her system sooner rather than later. It's going to take a while to grow back Faecalibacterium to a level where it's producing a lot of butyrate. So maybe we want some butyrate for the brain and the gut a little sooner. So we can supplement with it directly. Now, then we talk about our H. pylori protocol. If we're going with herbs, I look at generally, I want at least 3 things together for at least 2 months. Now, popular things we may include in a protocol include mastic gum, DGL licorice, maybe some broad spectrum antimicrobial herbs. That could be berberine, it could be olive leaf, could be black cumin. We have lots of options here, and many of those are antifungal. And then there are some specific strains of Lactobacillus reuteri probiotics that will also have direct anti-H. pylori effects. And again, when we have candida in the picture, consider including an antimicrobial herb that you know has effects against both H. pylori and candida. And again, a lot of these herbs do. So you're covered in case that candida wants to help out the H. pylori. If we weaken it a little bit, hopefully it's not going to be able to help. Then we have our parasite/dysbiosis protocol. Now with parasites, key herbs tend to be Artemisia, which is sweet wormwood, black walnut, oregano, and clove. And then finally, the GI repair powder. So things with L-glutamine, zinc carnosine, slippery elm, etc.
Wow. All right. That's a hefty protocol, but it was a hefty GI map and a hefty symptom load. So undoubtedly we're gonna move the needle really quickly on those patient symptoms. And we'll unpack this a little bit more after Dr. Amy goes through her case. We'll do a little roundtable, again, talking order of operations. So thank you, Dr. Lisa. That was awesome.
Sure.
Let's go ahead and go through case number 2. Yeah, Dr. Amy, take it away.
Okay, great job, Lisa. That was a complicated case. So this case is a 3-year-old child who's had full body super severe eczema, like weeping, itching eczema ever since they were 3 months old, which is in my practice a really common time to see eczema set in. Other things that are unexpected for a 3-year-old were low energy throughout the day, difficulty sleeping at night, really restless, itchy at night, and also seeming like there was some GI distress at night too. And then some loose stools daily and abdominal distension. Okay, so It's worth noting that GI map does not have pediatric specific reference ranges. We get a lot of questions about, can we run the test on children? Can we run the test on babies? I would say yes, but it's interpreted a little bit differently. So it's worth reaching out to the clinical team, and we do have expertise in interpretation for children. Now, all the markers on GI-MAP are measured per gram of stool, not per size of the gut. The things you want to take into consideration when you are interpreting for children is, how old is the child? Maybe somewhere between 2.5 to 4 years old. The microbiome and the gut markers should start to resemble that of an adult. And up to that point, there are organisms that we are expecting to see showing up at different time stages. Generally, in my practice, I don't run this test on young babies, especially if they're doing well or have low-grade symptoms. If I had a baby in my practice that was struggling to an extreme degree, yeah, I would take a look at the test. Excuse me. But knowing that one of the hallmarks of the pediatric microbiome is change. And especially the younger they are, the more you'll see that dynamism in the microbiome. So for a young baby, like 3 months old, we don't run a baseline test. There's no such thing as a baseline microbiome for a 3-month-old, because by the time you get the test back 2 weeks later, it's going to look totally different. But for a 3-year-old like this, absolutely. We run the GI map and we look in the context of symptoms, in the context of what may be normal for children, and do call in for a clinical consult if you want help with your pediatric interpretations, because we do it all the time. So other things to consider for kids is the maturation of the microbiome. So I just referred to that a moment ago, that over the first year of life, you're going to have extreme changes from week to week, month to month. And some organisms are not expected to be present in the first 6 months of age. And if you look at the tests, you'd think, oh my goodness, Akkermansia is not there, Faecalibacterium is not there. And if you call in, we'd say, yep, that's normal. And then sometime between 9 and 12 months old, as things show up, we think, okay, yeah, this is supposed to be there. This is supposed to be there at this level. And then some children, depending on genetic environmental factors, may have an immaturity of the microbiome that we might see up to 2 years old. And you think, okay, this actually looks like the microbiome of a much younger child or a baby, and they're struggling with symptoms. Worth looking at on pediatric tests, and actually anybody's test, is the patterns of dysbiosis, intestinal health markers. So more than the individual organisms showing up on the test, it's important to look at all the factors on the test, look at it as a whole, and look for patterns like inflammatory dysbiosis, insufficiency of the normal flora, and then at page 4, we've got our intestinal health markers that might bring some insight. Also to consider with children is exposures to organisms and pathogens, because children move around the world in a different way than adults. They're picking things up, they're putting things on their mouths. They may not be washing their hands as we hope they might. So you'll see a lot of organisms coming and going that can be managed. And then we look at the levels of those organisms. We look at how many show up at the same time. And you may see a test for a child on one day, and 2 months later, you retest in a totally different set of organisms. And what that speaks to more is a weakness in the gut environment, if they're allowed to thrive and grow to larger levels, but not so much a persistent infection with that particular organism. Also within the exposure risk is thinking about who within that small child circle might be in contact with their feces. Because when it comes to children, you do need to think that a lot of these organisms are transferred fecal orally. And so if you come up with an organism that's, could be more of a public health hazard type organism that's kept at bay at a low level in the child, you need to think about people that are changing diapers, like grandparents, and what their exposure risk might be, and minimizing that if there is an organism that could be infectious. That's all I want to say on interpretation for children, but do think about getting our assistance with that, because we can look at these tests in great detail for you.
Okay. Look at this one.
Yeah. So treatment considerations. Yeah. And this doesn't have to be long. When you think about children, they don't swallow pills. Even when they can, we'll see an 11-year-old who can swallow pills. Do they want to? Generally not. We're thinking about the amount of dosing. It doesn't have to be challenging, but we're thinking about the age, weight of patient, how to deliver those supplements and nutraceuticals so that they will actually go down and be used. Because sometimes we'll see children on the autism spectrum and they're very texture sensitive, flavor sensitive. And so you look at the test and you think, okay, we're very limited in what we can give this child. So it is worth having flavors on hand and being ready to do some trial and error. So thinking about things like peas, glycerite, different powders and liquids, whether things are water soluble, whether you can chase down some things with some juice that might be antimicrobial, like our blueberry and pomegranate juices. And then for dosing, it's a pretty crude system of dosing, but I use Clark's rule, which uses a 150-pound adult as a pharmacologic adult. And so you take the child's weight, say they're 30 pounds, divide it by 150 pounds, you've got 1/5. And so you multiply that by the adult dose, and that child would get roughly 1/5 of an adult dose. And this is appropriate for some remedies that we know are safe for children that don't have a narrow therapeutic window. So there's no significant dangers in overdosing or underdosing, which is a lot of our nutraceuticals. So Clark's rule is worth keeping on hand. That is a handy thing you can use to adjust an adult dose to a child dose. Okay, so let's take a look at the test. So page 1. Yeah, go ahead, Kat.
Just saying, whoa, because there's a lot going on here.
You're not wrong, Kat.
Yeah.
So here we have 4 separate pathogens. And this, I would say this is not completely typical for children, but it is more acceptable to have pathogens and inflammatory dysbiosis in children than adults. So I have a higher threshold of within which I will tolerate a bit of inflammatory dysbiosis, not always in a 3-year-old, but around the 18 month to 2 years of age, it is really normal and natural to have exposure to some gram-negative organisms, to things that are non-self, non-normal, and that is important for the immune system to interface with, to develop that self versus non-self. But now, for a child that has 4 pathogens present, this is not normal. And it's also not common. A lot of these are at levels, I would say actually all of them are at levels below the threshold at which they would show up as a clinical infection. Something like that C. difficile there, where we see C. diff toxins starting to be positive and say extreme diarrhea and hospitalization is going to be around the E7 level, or in the tens of millions at the E7 level. Whereas E3, we've got carrier status. We've got what would be considered an asymptomatic carrier status, even though this child has symptoms. But C. diff at low levels can still be problematic. You can have damage to the gut lining. You can have GI symptoms. You can have some anxiety sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also see a gene for one of our nastier genes for E. coli next that can produce toxin at higher levels. We see salmonella, which is actually a very uncommon finding for GI map. And we see Giardia present. So first thing I'm going to ask this patient, or more likely the patient's caretakers or caregivers, is how was the child feeling around the time of testing? Was there anything out of the ordinary? Was anything running through your family gut bug wise? Because salmonella is really uncommon to find chronically. We see it sometimes rolling through and then it's dealt with. Now at the E3 level, this is more than just an incidental exposure. This has to at least somewhat increase in volume or population to show up at this level. So it's a decent amount, but not a severe infection amount. So how did this person feel within the couple weeks before or a couple weeks after this test, or even days?
Yeah.
And then
So
we're also go ahead.
I was just going to say, so if I'm understanding this correctly, because this is a lot of pathogens on page 1, and typically, I would say the vast majority of the time we see nothing on page 1. So if I'm understanding, you're saying that this is more common in a child with a maturing gut, but certainly not healthy normal, and indication of probably weak terrain and of course exposure as well. Is that okay?
Yeah. In my experience, it's common to see one pathogen. It's not normal to see one pathogen, but we can accept a little bit of abnormal and then deal with it and strengthen the immunity, strengthen the normal flora, crowd these out. But to see 4 at once, this is not just a one-time exposure. This shows an inherent, maybe not inherent, but a current weakness at some point in GI ecology that's allowing these pathogens to thrive. So what is going on with this child that is allowing these 4 pathogens to hang around at a low level, and what can we do about it? So it's not always about the particular organisms present, although some of these might need a bit of a kick out, but we might just need to strengthen immunity, strengthen or tonify immunity, and work on normal flora and defense systems.
Yeah. And this is not the only thing we're going to find on this GI map, I have a feeling.
Spoiler alert.
Let's look at the rest.
Yeah. Okay. Let's look at page 2, where we next would look at H. pylori. You see here, there's no number for H. pylori, meaning that there it doesn't necessarily mean zero, but it means less than 100 organisms per gram of H. pylori, which is not significant. Now, for children at any number, I'm less likely to treat a child than I am an adult. So it takes more H. pylori for me to want to treat a child directly for H. pylori, unless they're extremely symptomatic. So here, nothing else to think about here for the H. pylori. Now we look at the commensal keystone bacteria. These are the bacteria that we want to see present, the normal flora. And we'll see the first thing that may or may not jump out to you, probably not, is the second line item, bifidobacterium. So this is among the first organisms to show up for babies. Not the first wave, but generally the second wave of bacteria to show up that is completely normal, beneficial, and really protective. Now, for a child this age, we want this pushing more up towards the high E10s, maybe even the E11s. And so here at the low E9s for a 3-year-old, that's not normal. That's not an ideal number, even though it's within the reference range. So we're looking at this in the context of pediatrics, in the context of a child with compromised barrier function, because bifidobacterium is so integral for the health of the gut lining and for the health of the colon. Next thing we'll notice here, not completely low, but on the low end is Faecalibacterium proveniency. And this, as Lisa explained so thoroughly, is one of our best butyrate producers. I would like to support this in a child. Often I'll be giving butyrate directly, especially in a case of frank inflammation, like eczema. We do see inflammation, and butyrate is great for barrier function. Now, when we're supporting butyrate through things like fiber and dietary fiber, it does help to also supplement bifidobacterium, because Faecalibacterium can be missing the enzymes necessary to break down some of those fibers. So to give bifidobacterium actually can cross-feed Faecalibacterium. So we're always looking back when we have a low Faecalibacterium, where is the bifido level? And do we need to supplement that as well?
Some good pearls, definitely.
Thank you, Kat. So the next finding here is, oh, never mind. We're not going to talk about the low Bacteroidetes, but that didn't get circled. But the Bacteroidetes phylum, also a group in the colon. So these are the ones that I am pointing out as low are colon organisms. They're obligate anaerobes. So they need to have a non-inflamed colon. They need to have a healthy gut environment, and we want to support them by removing dysbiosis, of which there is a lot. And things like Faecalibacterium are really protective against C. diff. We want to boost that up specifically, give some butyrate, give some bifido, and think about colon health. Okay, so yes, ready to move on, Kat. Okay, so here we see the opportunistic and overgrowth microbes. So these are the organisms, in contrast with the pathogens, that need to have a weakness in the gut ecology to take a foothold. And we see a few things here that are really significant, especially significant in skin inflammation. So we see our enterococcus. We see the enterococcus slightly overgrowing, but what's more significant is going to be the staph and the strep here. So at these levels, especially this level of staph, this is really high. But the strep, both of these, when they're high, are often implicated in eczema. And so I look at these as targets to decrease. Now, they can also be associated with digestive insufficiency, carbohydrate malabsorption, or sometimes overconsumption of carbohydrate, but really related to eczema.
Yeah, that's an extremely high Staphylococcus aureus E4. And my understanding of eczema pathophysiology is that Staph aureus specifically is really one of the major sort of villains of eczema, if you will. And it's a mast cell activator and also a very pH sensitive organism. So that, I would say, in this case is definitely one of the more remarkable findings thus far. We're not all the way
And
through.
sometimes you'll see it culturing on the skin too. No,
Yes.
Staph aureus does not always mean MRSA. It's not, it would fall within this, but this is not guaranteed to be resistant to antibiotics. Most commonly, it'll be sensitive. Now let's look lower down on page 3. We're looking at yeast and viral infections, and we do have this pretty massive population of Candida. Now the E4 level in our test is significant. And for a child with eczema, this is going to be very significant. So I'm looking at this. This is a pretty persistent organism, so I wouldn't expect this to just be a transient exposure. This is likely to be a bit more chronic, and really affecting barrier function. Okay, so let's take a look at page 4. We look at parasite, and We've got this low-level cyclospora. Now, cyclospora is one of the opportunistic parasites that I don't always treat when it's within range. Often, if I saw this in isolation, I would say, okay, let's work on immunity, let's work on digestion, let's make the environment less hospitable to cyclospora, and it won't be there on retest. And consistently, it won't be there on retest. But you'll remember on page 1, we also had Giardia. So here we've got 2 protozoa. And that to me is really significant. So by itself, not significant. Paired with Giardia and Hayes, 3 bacterial infections and Candida, yeah, we've got a lot to deal with here, and I take this a bit more seriously.
Yes.
Okay. Now, intestinal health markers. Lisa, you did such a good job explaining these. Similar to the last case, we've got a low elastase. So this is a measure of pancreatic enzyme output. And for children, I do expect to see a nice robust elastase, at least 500. So this is significant, especially since we have so much overgrowth. When you're leaving nutrients undigested, first of all, it's going to affect your nutrient status and your ability to do things like maintain a healthy gut environment, maintain that barrier function and gut lining and skin function. But it's also going to leave nutrients on the table that will allow organisms to thrive. So if you're not eating it and absorbing it, somebody else will, and they're going to live in your gut and they're going to have a great time, and they'll affect your health, your immunity, and all aspects of life. So this is something we can address in the short and long run. In the shorter run, I often give digestive enzymes. There's some great chewable formulae for kids or adults that like to chew. And then in the longer run, as we improve barrier function, gut lining function, often I'll see this elastase increase. Now, we also see a really low secretory IgA, so the opposite end of the spectrum of where Lisa had her patient. So seeing a low secretory IgA, this can happen secondary to chronic infections, chronic stress, which for a 3-year-old is possible, but in this case, it was not part of the picture, but also gut lining dysfunction. Did I mention nutrient deficiency? I don't think I did. Maybe I did. It's doubled up if I did. So having low secretory IgA is a huge problem when you have 4 pathogens, yeast, other things hanging out, because this is your non-specific antibody immune response that is going to recognize non-self, non-normal, and it's going to help call in the immune system and eliminate organisms. So throughout treatment, we want to support superficial immunity and the recognition of pathogens and organisms that need to be removed. And then in the longer run, as we improve gut function, remove some of those organisms, this should rebound.
Yeah.
Okay. And then so we don't have true inflammation, no blood, nothing to worry about there. But yeah, breaking down this case in the most relevant findings, we have got multiple pathogens, page 1 pathogens, and then we've got opportunistic dysbiosis. So we can lump this all together. Certainly the pathogens are more important to see that they're eliminated in terms of the health of people around this child for long-term health, and they can increase in population pretty quickly. So we want to get those gone. And for children, I don't always retest, but I do retest the pathogen page to make sure these are gone. Now, third, we want to look at the low flora. I would say it's really important to get the Bacillobacterium present in the GI up. They're going to be really protective against pathogenic and opportunistic organisms, as well as supportive of gut lining function, anti-inflammatory status, and overall health. We're going to look at low digestive capacity, that was the low elastase, and also low gut immunity. So how I would prioritize this treatment, I would want to support the immunity and digestion first. I want to get a good foothold on that support, get a chewable digestive enzyme in there. Maybe we're looking at things like colostrum or a bovine immunoglobulin here. Maybe we want to use botanicals. There's some great liquid-based formulae for kids and immunity. And then we want to move in to support the low flora. So sometimes to get your Faecalibacterium back, you do need to decrease some of your dysbiosis, but you can support it in the short run. And you can also give things like butyrate to help support the gut lining and to help be protective against C. diff growing. So we want to support the colon flora, things like fiber in the diet. If we can get that up, we want to do some polyphenols, and that can be dietary or supplemental. And then the next priority is going to be looking at other risk factors in pathogenic and opportunistic growth. So yeah, digestion and immunity, those are huge risk factors. We want to look at exposures in the environment. So is this a child that's drinking water? Is this a child in a preschool can they be washing their hands better? Because anybody that's got kids, it's a big life lesson. You got to wash your hands and you stop chewing your nails, sucking on your fingers. That's a huge risk factor, is that perpetual exposure. Pets in the house as well, and siblings. And then number 4, in this case, I would be extremely likely to, but in not every pediatric case will I do a kill. So in this case, because we have those 4 pathogens, Giardia is really persistent. And then we've got Candida, which is really persistent. I would be likely to give something to manage that dysbiosis at this point. But first, I really want to build up that foundation of gut health. And then circling back to clinical history, so we can look at the test for days and act on the test for days, but we also need to look at the child and think, what else works really well for kids with eczema? And I would consider food eliminations. One way you can do that is through a food panel, which is blood-based, like the IgG and IgE. And for eczema, I do frequently include the IgE. I don't think IgG is enough. And often the IgE or the true allergies will come back negative, but a lot of the time in children with eczema, you will see those IgE allergies involved. And sometimes they're quite low grade, but really affecting the skin.
It's an atopic condition, so that absolutely makes sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
and we want to bring down the immune response. We're not bring down, but tonify the immune response, and any excessive immune response, any inflammation that we're potentially perpetuating on a daily basis, we want to decrease. And then we want to repair the gut. So let's go through the protocol. Yeah, we're running a bit low on time, so I want to just kind of jam through this. I've mentioned a few of these. So we're going to support. We're going to give things like colostrum, immunoglobulin to help the immunity, a digestive enzyme with every meal. And I would, in this case, give butyrate. We want to give some protective organisms. My top 2 choices here would be Saccharomyces, and that's going to help protect against the pathogens, especially the C. diff. It's going to crowd out the Candida a bit. And then the Bifidobacterium, because it's not frankly low, but for a child, I would consider the E9 level frankly low. And we want cross feed the Saccharomyces and support a nice anti-inflammatory environment in the gut. You could also consider if the E. coli and the Salmonella were more persistent, or if we retested and they were still there, you may consider specific phage-based probiotics here that can target specifically E. coli or specifically Salmonella. And in the first round of treatment, I probably would not, unless they had a significant history with those organisms. In terms of diet and lifestyle, we want to increase fiber and polyphenols as much as possible. So that could be as simple as berries daily, or some legumes, sneak those in, some brownies or something like that. We also want to decrease sugars and simple carbohydrates. I didn't list that, but that would be really important in a case where there is a high level of Candida. We want to look at exposure and how to modify the exposures to potential fecal oral pathogens. And then maximize sleep quality and decrease stressors. And integral to maximizing sleep is going to be getting that itchy skin under control and gut feeling better. Now, in this case, I'm not listing botanicals. There are a lot out there. For antimicrobials, often I'm going to consider glycerate formula, which is like a tincture but in glycerin, and it's sweeter, tolerable for children, but something that still has a flavor. And as well as that, teas can work really well for children. So those are my top 2 methods of delivery, because a lot of our antimicrobials are pretty nasty tasting. And now, I mentioned before the blueberry and pomegranate juice, like pure blueberry, pure pomegranate. We're not talking about ocean spray, cran cocktail here, but those can be used to dilute some of our liquid glycerates. If they do taste strongly of things like garlic and oregano, you can put them in juice, pound it back, and those juices are high in polyphenols, are reds and dark purples, and they're also somewhat antimicrobial to a lot of these organisms. Okay, so I've got that.
No, thanks, Amy. I know we're bumping up on the clock here, but so I want to take it back, and I want to talk to both of you and just really, we went through a lot just now. Both of these were really eye-opening cases, tons of co-infections and dysbiosis. So again, going back to that most common question of what is the order of operations? And I know there's different philosophies here. Some practitioners will take that top-down approach. In the first case, we saw H. pylori. In the second, we did not, where top-down would be start with your higher anatomical organisms and then work down versus a broad spectrum approach. So would you both mind just speaking to that quickly? And maybe there's personal philosophy, maybe there's a case by case basis, maybe it depends on the constitution of the patient. That's a big thing in my mind, in my practice too. There are patients that can only handle so much at once, but I'd love to hear from both of you on that briefly.
Sure. For an adult, I generally work north to south, although worms are different. If there are worms, worms go first. They're multicellular versus the protozoa are unicellular. So worms will go first, and then I usually work north to south. So it's not a hard and fast rule. If there's a compelling reason to go after a parasite first, if there was Giardia and there's screaming Giardia symptoms, I'm probably going to kill the Giardia first. But my default tends to be H. pylori. So I'll focus on that first, and then I'll work down to the parasites in the small and large intestine. Again, we can often lump those together, and the bacteria and yeast can often get lumped together in that protocol too. Now, say there were no parasites, and then we can go right to the dysbiosis. So it might be H. pylori if it's there, then parasites if it's there, then bacteria and yeast.
Okay, makes sense. And then how about you, Amy? Especially,
I have a similar approach. Yeah, for children, it's different. I would say where I differ from you, Lisa, is I'll often treat Candida before H. pylori. So I'll get Candida first, and then sometimes layer in the H. pylori if they're both raging high level. But oftentimes you'll see a patient, like you mentioned, and their symptoms are just screaming Candida. And so a lot of the people on this call today are clinicians, and we know that we want to build trust with our patients. So it's really valid and reasonable to follow their symptoms sometimes and then circle back to a top-down approach. So yes, to kill H. pylori and other organisms that modulate the environment so much and can increase dysbiosis, it's really reasonable to treat those and then work your way down to the dysbiosis. But sometimes, yeah, if you have 4 pathogens, you want those gone. So say if someone is absolutely screaming symptoms of one organism, like Blastocystis hominis comes up and they've had gut cramps and diarrhea for years and have been ignored for years or misdiagnosed for years, we want that gone. And then we work around it. But also layering in potential public health hazards like C. difficile, toxin-producing E. coli, salmonella. We want those gone. We want to confirm that they're gone and then move on to other organisms. Now, when it comes to children, sometimes we're limited in what remedies we can use based on flavor, based on palatability, and a lot of the botanicals you use for children are going to be broad spectrum. So often you'll sprinkle everything at once, and children respond so readily to therapeutics that often I will do the everything at once approach or addressing the most symptomatic, most kind of public health hazard concerning first, and then move on to the top-down approach.
Okay, that sounds very reasonable. So I think in both of these cases, we saw really weak digestion, and in both cases, we prioritize that digestive support first. And I think that's very common, and that's why having those intestinal health markers as part of the test is so valuable, because you've got to connect the ecology with the proteins. And then how about, this will be our last roundtable, but the timing of the gut repair. So clearly in both of these cases, we had zonulin on one, we did not have zonulin on the other. Zonulin is an add-on marker to the GI map, but both of these showed extreme patterns of dysbiosis. So when does the gut repair come into it? Do you do that at the beginning? Do you do that after you remove? I know the kind of traditional 4R approach, remove comes first. Are you doing that? Obviously, we're taking that approach to supporting the commensals, which goes hand in hand. But could we hear from both of you briefly on that? And Lisa, I know you need to go, so you go first.
Yeah. Again, there's no hard and fast rule. It's a situational basis. I look at, we're going to get the most bang for our buck to go in with a gut repair formula after we've gotten rid of the things that are actively damaging the gut. Otherwise, if they're still there, it's 1 step forward, 1 step backwards, or maybe 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. So it helps after is where I typically put it. Now, that being said, say someone, again, has terrible cramps and discomfort, they're having a hard time with their herbs and their gut, they're just so miserable. Those formulas are just very healing and soothing. I might bring it in the very first thing I do because it's helping with their symptoms. So it could be more bang for your buck at the end for healing, but could be done before and all during the killing phases for just calming, soothing, healing, and just tolerance of supplements.
Yeah, I'm with you on a lot of that, Lisa. And then another reason I would add in gut repair from the beginning is if somebody's clinical picture was screaming barrier dysfunction. So say a child with eczema, an adult with joint pain that gets worse every time they eat, autoimmunity, things like that. I'll put in things, and generally I'll aim for a formula that's non-fermentable at first. So sometimes people are so overwhelmed by their gut protocols, they can get really complicated really quickly, and often they're going to be short-term ideally. So sometimes there's room for one extra supplement and sometimes there's not. But if there is, often I'll add in something without too many mucilaginous herbs and something very non-fermentable, or just say in a child, butyrate can be really gut repairing. But then to get that gut repaired, you need to remove barriers to gut repair, which can be things like the pathogen, yeast, things like that. So I'm with you on finishing off with gut repair, but sometimes I'll add it in the beginning. And then caution with glutamine in children, and sometimes the metabolism is funky there. I do know some practitioners just completely avoid it in children. I'm not one of those practitioners because I see a lot of children that metabolize it absolutely perfectly.
Yeah.
And it can be really helpful.
Awesome. Thank you to you both. And retesting here is a bullet, and there's different philosophies on this. I would say in both of these cases, there's certainly enough dysbiosis and infections and co-infections that personally, I feel like both of them would warrant a retest down the road after a protocol is finished. I think Amy mentioned you can run just page 1 of the GI map, just the pathogens panel as a standalone. If money is an obstacle, that's always an option to keep the costs a little bit more affordable. But especially in that case, I think, would you agree with both of that? If the child, if we put together a protocol, run our patients through it, then they're feeling awesome. There isn't always a necessity to retest, but I would say in this case, there's enough things that we're trying to just make sure we get rid of that we want to make sure we get rid of that.
Agree. Yeah, if that child has perfect skin, perfect guts 3 months down the road, which I do see with children, often they rebound really quickly. Sometimes it's stubborn, sometimes not. But if this child is feeling amazing, there's no reason to retest based on symptoms. But yes, based on those 4 pathogens, I want to see that clean page 1.
Yeah. This is a little bit more about us and where to find us. Dr. Lisa has included a promotional code that's a little time sensitive here for her mentorship program. If you want to, we're at DSL, we're on the phones there. But of course, if you want to find us outside, this is how you do it. And otherwise, I would just say thank you. And Britton, let me know what you want to do here. I think we could probably hang out for a few more minutes, take a couple questions, but I know we're already over time.
Welcome to Rupa Health, the best place to order, manage, and track results from over 30 different lab companies in one single place for free. It's going to take you under 2 minutes to sign up, and you can order any functional medicine lab for your client in under 30 seconds. Let me show you how it's done. So here's our beautiful interface. I'm typing in the name of my client, selecting the lab that I want to order for them, and hitting send. From there, Rupa and their amazing team handle the rest. They email the client, collect payment, and even offer an interest-free 3-month payment plan. We've also built the world's largest library of information about chronic health conditions, the lab tests that can help you find the root cause, and the evidence-based interventions that you can use to help people heal from them. It's called the Rupa Health Magazine. There, we have in-depth articles about almost any health condition you can imagine. And we give you step-by-step protocols that other clinicians have used to help their clients heal and that are verified by evidence-based sources. You should totally check it out, and it'll transform your practice. And we can't wait to see you. So make sure you sign up today at rupahealth.com.